Hello, and welcome to the Research Library Bible Study Series. This video, titled Who Are the New Testament Elect, Part 3, is a continuation of our study to determine the identity of the New Testament elect. In Part 2, we left off with an examination of the Epistle to the Ephesians, in which it was determined the saints and the predestinated, mentioned in Chapter 1, were of the children of Israel and not of the Gentiles. In this video, we will examine the Epistle to the Romans to verify the identity of the elect. This epistle, like the one to the Ephesians, was also addressed to the saints. The first time Paul specifically identifies the addressees is in chapter 2. Who would be instructed out of the law, rely on the law, and be called a Jew, except for a Jew? Therefore, it is reasonable to assume that the saints to whom Paul addressed this letter were Jews. The identity of those who established the church at Rome is a mystery. The most likely candidates are those devout Jews from Rome who were in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost. Dr. Michael Heiser, a biblical scholar and expert on ancient Semitic languages, mentions this in his commentaries on the Acts of the Apostles. The Acts and other commentary series can be accessed here. In chapter 7, Paul again identifies his audience as Israelites and explains that they are no longer under the law. The wife, Israel, was released from the law upon the death of her husband and was free to marry another, even Christ. Therefore, the death and resurrection of Christ was the method in which Israel was lawfully released from the first covenant so that she could be given the new covenant. With the Jews still as his audience, Paul begins this passage addressing himself and the Jews as we, and ends the passage referring to himself and them as we and us. The passage adds the new identifier for new to the previous identifiers of firstborn and predestinated. Recall from Part 2 in the section on Ephesians, where Paul explained that those who were predestinated were also the first to trust Christ. Paul used similar phraseology in this passage, but rendered the first to trust Christ as the firstborn among many brethren. So, apart from the apostles, who were both the first to trust Christ and the firstborn among many brethren? Perhaps Paul is referring to these men, and of course himself. A few verses later, Paul again identifies his audience as children of Israel. The highlighted portion came from Psalm 44, which identifies the audience as the children of Israel. The prophecy was foretelling the days of Paul when the faithful children of Israel would be persecuted for the Lord's sake. The phraseology of this passage presumes Paul's audience was the children of Israel. This is the first passage in which Paul specifically addresses the Gentiles. However, he was not addressing the Gentiles to praise them, but rather to rebuke their pretentious behavior. Therefore, the predestinated elect, whom God foreknew, are thus far identified only as Israelites. At this time, we will turn to what many consider to be the most solid evidence that born-again Gentiles are part of the elect. At first glance, it appears Paul is referring to the Jews and Gentiles. But recall that Paul was addressing the Jewish leadership of the Roman Church until chapter 11, verse 13. Notice also that Paul was referring to the children of Israel, both houses, until verse 24, and again afterward. So perhaps Paul was saying to the Jews at Rome that the Lord did not call only the Jews, the house of Judah, but also the house of Israel scattered among the nations. The Hosea prophecy Paul referenced supports the interpretation that he was referring to the two houses of Israel and not the Gentiles. A careful reading of Hosea is crucial in determining the correct context. For example, Hosea said the Lord will have mercy on the house of Judah, but the kingdom of the house of Israel will cease to exist. Further, the Lord will no longer show mercy to the house of Israel, and they will no longer be his people. The Hebrew name for the child Lo Ruhamah translates to not pitied, not loved, or no mercy. The root words are lo, for no or not, and racham, for love, mercy, or pity. The Hebrew name Lo Ami translates to not my people. The root word Ami means a people as expected. So the house of Israel is no longer God's people, nor will God show them any mercy. But in this verse, God explains the divorce is temporary. He promises a future restoration of the houses of Judah and Israel under one leader. Notice the prefix lo has disappeared from the children's names, indicating the house of Israel will again be a people and beloved. The house of Israel will someday cease from her whoredoms and return to her first husband, the Lord. And the Lord will remarry her under a new covenant. These are the Septuagint verses Paul quoted. You may have noticed that the Hosea prophecy was exclusively about the two houses of Israel. There is not a whisper about the Gentiles. Therefore, an exegetically accurate translation of Romans 9:24 would be as previously determined and is also consistent with this declaration. It also correlates with Peter's reference to the Hosea prophecy when he addressed the scattered tribes in Asia Minor regarding the pre-covenantal promises from Exodus. Peter's quotes from Exodus came from the Septuagint. The promises from Exodus were only to the children of Israel. The promises of restoration in Hosea were only to the two houses of Israel. And both Peter and Paul were addressing the children of Israel when they quoted Hosea. Therefore, an interpretation that the Gentiles are of the elect, or were predestinated, or that God foreknew them, must be derived from eisegesis of those passages, or from some other source. This concludes this video series, Who Are the New Testament Elect? Keep an eye on this channel for more videos in the Research Library Bible Study series. Also visit the Bible Research Tools website to learn more about the Research Library Bible Study software that is used in this video series. Thank you for watching.